Hey guys, how are you? Daniel Marcos here from San Diego. I came to a workshop here in San Diego. I'm going to be here for 2 days, but inflation, it's so current, and so many clients were asking about inflation, what they're doing, and how can you really deal with inflation or an inflationary market the best, that we decided to do this live conversation. So if you have questions, please start sending your questions, but I'm going to probably teach 15, 20 minutes of some notes that I have here. I have my iPad here below me, so I'm going to go through some notes. I'll give you some ideas, and then we'll go to some Q&A and some conversation. So first, why inflation is a problem today? And we've had the last 10, 20 years, most of the years have been with very, very little inflation or no inflation at all sometimes. And now we're with inflation like we had in the 80s. And of course, most of the companies today, most of us, the executives of today, we've never dealt with big inflation. So we don't know how to operate our business with inflation. And most importantly, we don't have systems and procedures or processes on how to adjust our prices to inflation. And I'm having a lot of conversations with all the CEOs saying, hey, my prices, the price that I charge my client, I haven't changed it, but my costs have gone significantly up. All my raw materials, everything that I buy has raised prices. And what is happening is making my margins smaller. So the problem is your revenue stays the same, or you're growing revenue, but your margins are getting smaller because of inflation. So let's talk a little bit about how to mitigate inflation in your business. And we'll talk about some strategies, and also how can you use negotiations, a negotiation experience, and be able to deal with this. All right, a couple of slides, and then that's going to be it. Everything is going to be a conversation with me, and whatever questions you come, open your cameras. Let's have a conversation. All right, so what do we do at the Growth Institute? We partner with amazing thought leaders like the ones you see in the screen, and the idea is to help you, 10 million leaders like you, be able to scale your impact and reduce the drama by 2040. We believe scaling businesses is amazing, and it's hard to do it, but also, if you scale your business and then you don't have a life, that we see or hear a lot of our executives or clients telling us, that's not worth it. So how can you really scale your business and really enjoy the ride? And of course, a little bit of our track of today. We've trained around 55,000 executives from 10,000 different companies, or 11,000 different companies in 70 countries around the world. All right, and this is the team behind everything we do at the Growth Institute. Super thankful and proud of the team. They do an amazing work. And we have a policy that we cannot teach anything that we don't use internally. And we've been the Inc. 5000 for 4 years in a row. So everything we teach, we use internally. And these that we're teaching now today are talking about inflation. We're having the same issues. A lot of our expenses are up. Last week, one of my team members came and said, hey, I need you to raise my salary. They just raised my rent by 30%. So now my cost of living went up by 30%. I need more money. So we're all having the same issues. We're all having the same inflationary pressures. Let's talk about that. A little bit about myself. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 23 years. Originally in Mexico, I built my first company in Mexico, grew it and sold it. And then with a new company, grow it again, and then sold it with around 1,200 employees and operation in 9 countries. So we've seen fast growth in the beginning, and then these are some of the other companies I've been associated with. And something interesting, I have clients all over the world that we work and we help with how to scale their company. And the countries that we work, that they usually have high inflation, like Argentina. I have a very good client, or a really big client in Argentina. They're having 40% of inflation, 30. So when they see that we complain in the US that we have 7% inflation, like, wow, that's a lot of inflation. It's not that much. They've used to deal with much bigger. Indeed, I'm from Mexico, as I said. I remember in the 80s, sometimes the restaurant menu, they have to reprint it between lunch and dinner because inflation was so high. They raised prices the same day between lunch and dinner. My Argentinian client used to tell me that in the 80s, whenever you sat down at the table, you order and you had to pay there, because 2 hours later, there was going to be inflation. It was a higher price. So it's like that crazy outside of the US or outside of the developed world. In the last 15, 20 years, we've worked or lived around the developed world in a very stable environment on inflation, and that has reflected in a lot of growth on our companies, but we're missing systems and processes to deal with inflation. So let's get into that. Why is inflation a big issue today? And why it's so different? Because we have a lot of growth. And inflation was created because a lack of supply chain. We had a lot of supply chain from Asia and stuff that stopped or had problems with COVID. They stopped the port, or they stopped the factory for some months or something, and that put strain on supply. And also the monetary policy of all the government around the world. They had to inject a lot of money to try to get more money to the people in their countries, because a lot of people were not making any money or were making less money, and they need to supplement that income. So we had a disproportionate amount of money being injected into the economy, all the governments printing money, and then we had a supply issue with less supply. So you have more dollars or more pesos or more yen chasing less products and services, then of course you're going to create inflation. So we're having that. In the US today, the last number was 7.9, but really producer inflation, all our raw material that we buy has gone up at least for 10%. And I've had some of my clients said, hey, I've had some of my raw materials go up by 50 or even 100% of cost. Energy, it's crazy. I live in Texas today, I live in Austin. I was charging gas like at $4.50. In Austin, I've charged gas in, I think 14 years ago or so, at less than $1 the gallon. And today we're over $4 a gallon. So that's the real cost that we're having. And of course, that creates inflation in a lot of other things. Of course, this overinflation or inflation is creating a global liquidity, generating a lot of bubbles. And now we're having what they call the everything bubble. We've been having bubbles in a lot of assets that we have, like the stock market, like housing. Housing has grown significantly. A lot of people were 4 or 5 people living in the same house. Now with COVID and people working from home, now they start trying to get other apartments and try to get more space. Or people that were in apartments, they want to go to the suburbs, and they're creating a lot of inflation and demand. And of course, the prices of real estate is going up. Just to give you an idea, in the stock market, the price per earnings multiple, it's a multiple that you could see how expensive the market is. The average in the last 20 years has been 17 times. Today, it's 23.4. So it's probably 30% more expensive. The average company in the stock market, in the S&P 500. And of course, those are the most stable companies. Imagine all the tech companies, all the technology companies that have grown significantly because of all the use of technology recently. They're worth 2 or 3 times more their price when the pandemic started. So that's kind of what is happening. We're having supply chain issues. We're having a lot of monetary policies. We're having a bubble of assets around the world, and all of this is creating a lot of inflation. All right, how's that feeling with entrepreneurs? What do we hear? And people said, like, I'm really having a hard time. My margins are going to go smaller. Indeed, 2/3 of the entrepreneurs believe their margins are going to go smaller, already smaller, begin shrinking. 75% of entrepreneurs are concerned with shipping costs. We're still having a lot of layovers and delays with shipping. We're not getting enough material so we could do our work. And by the time we supply, our cost is higher. We already gave the price before or set the price before. And of course, our margins have been much, much smaller. And of course, suppliers have been hard to find. A lot of people are trying to find for suppliers. They take a long time to find a reliable supplier. And once you get it, the prices and the material you buy from them is more expensive. And you already had priced your product or services with a different price. And now you have inflation. And of course, your margins are getting smaller. So all of these. And then last month, we get the war in Ukraine. By the way, I've seen Ukraine. I've been there traveling when I was 15, but I've never really understood a lot of the importance of the country. And when you realize that between Russia and Ukraine had like 30 or 40% of the fertilizers of the world, then you see a really, really big problem of food. So we're going to have some shortages of food. And of course, that's going to create more inflation. And energy. All Europe depends on energy from Russia without buying energy from Russia, oil and gas. Now they have to import gas. Gas is going to go up. That's why we have oil over $100 a barrel, and that's also creating inflation. Everything you do, whenever you transport something, a lot of your raw materials, our energy come from oil, and of course that's going up, and of course you have inflation. So that's all the issues that we're having. And the one thing that we need to get better with an inflationary market or inflationary economy is be able to negotiate better. Super, super important that you're able to negotiate better. Why? You're going to have to negotiate a lot the next couple of years. You're going to have to negotiate with clients to raise your prices. You're going to have to negotiate with suppliers not to raise your price or how to mitigate the price increase. With your team members, you have to raise prices, you have to raise salaries. That's all negotiation. So today, negotiations have become even more important. So I want to talk first about some ideas, what you could do in your business to mitigate inflation. And then I'm going to go into some ideas how to use negotiations to improve the process and go through it much, much better. And the first thing that I would like to say is see it as a time of reset, recalibrate and clean up your company. This is the time when everything's growing really fast, companies are growing really fast, you kind of overlook and you spend a lot of money because you're trying to grow fast and just grow your top line. Now that your bottom line is shrinking, use the time to really recalibrate and clean your business. So where do I recommend you go and look and clean your business? First, get spending visibility. I talk with our clients and I say, show me your numbers or give me your numbers. They don't understand their numbers. They don't understand their margins, their labor efficiency margin, the cost of raw materials. So this is time to really get a lot of clarity and visibility on where you spend money. I strongly recommend sit down with your CFO, your financial controller, and really go through every line and understanding percentages, how much everything costs. And if you really need the things, whenever you're growing fast, you bought a lot of things that you're probably not even using today. Go again through all the systems that you're paying, go again through all the expense that you're doing, and for sure you're going to find something that you're not spending, or that you're spending that you don't need, or that you're overspending in something that you need. And it has happened. I've talked with my team and said, hey, what about this? And they say, well, yes, we need it, but I never thought we were spending that much in this. It's probably not that important. Why don't we see if we could reduce to half or just offer it to our premium clients or whatever? But there's ways for you to look at your spending and really be able to reduce a lot. Differentiate between strategic and non-strategic. When the economy is growing really, really fast and your company is growing really fast, you try to get your hands in a lot of different pockets, and you start getting new products and new services and new markets. And now it's time to really understand what markets, what products or services are really giving you a margin that it's worth it for you to really continue doing them. So differentiating what's strategic right now and what is not. And if you have a product or a service that is non-strategic with low margins, shut it down. Probably you don't need it. So do as you do a review of your expenses, do a review of your income and see what products or services are strategic and which ones are not, and be able to remove that. The same that I ask with relationships. There's a lot of vendors that you have today that are strategic vendors that in times like this, you probably could use less of them or negotiate the price, but don't let them go because you want to keep the relationship. And there's some non-strategic that it's okay if you let them go for some time. As an example, I was reading, preparing for this, an article that they believe the next thing people are going to start cutting are streaming services. Like, I've been a member of Netflix since 2004. When I did my MBA in Babson, I remember I was getting Netflix in CDs through the mail. And I've been paying monthly to Netflix since 2014. And with all this inflation, costs going up, I was talking in the table with my kids about it. And my daughter said, hey, you know what? We have Disney Plus, Apple TV, we have like 4 or 5. We don't see Netflix that much. And I was like, you don't? And she was like, no, we already saw most of the things in Netflix. Now we're seeing everything in other streaming services. Can you cancel it? And I was like, it's $12 or $15, but everything helps. So I talked with my son and we're canceling Netflix. I've never even thought about canceling Netflix since 2004. So I've been a client for 16 years without suspension. And now I'm thinking about cutting it down. So look at it and see what's strategic and non-strategic. Unpack the drivers of spending, really understand what each line item of your spending is, and be able to unpack it and see what creates that. And you will see that probably have something that costs you 20%. Once you unpack it and look at it, you could probably lower it to 12 or 13 or something. So unpack the drivers of spending, see everything that is there, improve the visibility, and you're going to be able to remove things. Reduce consumption. When you're growing really fast and there's a lot of money, we overconsume sometimes. So really sit down and say, hey, what's important, what is not important? Or what are we really using? Like Netflix. When things were growing great and we were growing really, really fast, or we're still growing fast in Growth Institute, but still, whenever you're getting all this money and the economy is doing great, you don't even look at Netflix. And I see a lot of people looking at Netflix today. So as an example, reduce consumption, see what you're consuming that you're not really using, and cut that. Eliminate work. There's a labor shortage around the world. There's a lot of expenses that have gone up for our team. You have to raise salaries. So there's probably some work that you really don't need. Going back to what's strategic or not strategic, go and look and how to eliminate some work. And you could probably repurpose some of your team members to do other work or just reduce the expense. But also there's a lot of work that you probably eliminate. And then automate. It's today, I've seen in the US, like no other being spending or investing in robotics. I think there's going to be the biggest wave of robotics investing in the US or in the West. Today, the US or the West, we depend too much on China. Why? Labor was very inexpensive 10, 20 years ago. We had all supply chains depending on China. Now there's a message to lower our dependency on China or dependency on globalization. And they're looking and saying, hey, how can I bring this back to the US? How can I bring this back to Canada or bring back production to Europe? And hey, should I invest in automate the process or get robotics or robots or something to do the manufacturing here? And we could do it same price or even cheaper. I just gonna have to do a big investment at the beginning for automated or do some invest in robots. And I'm seeing amazing growth of the robotics industry precisely because people are looking to bring production back to their countries, whatever your country is, and you're investing in robotics to be able to depend less in labor. Also, you have to really go back to see your prices. So everything we talk about up to now was about cost. Now let's talk about prices. And the pricing model, going back to memberships and all that, has significantly grown in acceptance. And you could probably charge your clients, hey, I'm going to charge you half or less than half, but it's going to be a subscription. You already been buying all of this from me. Now let's reduce the cost doing a subscription a la carte, kind of in a Netflix. And you could probably have the same services with a lower price, but you have more stability on revenue if you do it in recurring revenue. And I've seen a lot of companies, going back to streaming companies, they're willing to make less money to be able to have more stability in revenue. So look at your service and your products and really understand your pricing model, how do you sell it, and really deep. Today, if you want to change your pricing model, instead of raising your prices by 20%, it's probably better to change your pricing model and be able to still get to your numbers, what you want to get, but also giving the client an advantage. And 10 years ago, as an example, when we started Growth Institute, streaming services or a SaaS product, a membership, it was not that common. Today, it's way more common. We're willing to pay a membership as long as the cost is lower and the total cost is going to be lower. And of course, the companies, we increase our longevity or stability of revenue, and we're willing to make less if we have more stability of revenue. So I think it's important as you see your cost go up and you're going to analyze all your expenses, do the same on your pricing model or your business model and see if you're able to change it and improve. As an example, go into a recurring revenue could be a good way of adjusting your prices without increasing it by 20% and say, hey, I'll sell it to you at the same price or even 20% lower, but let's go into a membership that will give me more stability in my revenue and I'm willing to make less money. So as an example, it's important to see that. Of course, you have to understand the big picture. We are in a very global environment in services. but it's getting to be very local in products. I'm seeing a deglobalization in products around the world, but a globalization in services around the world. As an example, before we used to have offices in Mexico City and Austin before COVID. When COVID happened, we went fully remote. And today we're hiring team members all over the world. And we're finding amazing team members in other parts of the world for the same or lower price and or salary. And it's been amazing. We have now team, I think, in 5 or 6 different countries. And for us, it's the same. If you're in Austin or in Mexico or you're in Timbuktu, I really don't care, as long as you produce the value and you get your KPIs. So understand the big picture of how inflation is moving all over the world, and there should be some advantages of being able to really understand. Before COVID, we were very localized business usually, the way we operate. Now, COVID kind of changed the mentality, and that will allow you to see your business in a completely different structure or mindset and be able to have some advantages. Lead the negotiation tone, and later I'm going to get more deep into negotiations. But instead of waiting for your clients to come to negotiate with you, start the negotiation. Usually, whoever leads the negotiation and the negotiation tone, the negotiation timing, usually has an advantage in the negotiation. So I strongly recommend that you lead in the negotiation tone, timing, format, everything, and you could get more by the negotiation if you lead it. And just the last thing before I get more deep in negotiation, in every negotiation is not just about the money. It's about timing, it's about longevity, it's about time of response. There's a lot of other factors when you negotiate something. And this is what I really like Victoria Medvec, and that's why since I understood Victoria's negotiations tactics, my negotiations have been much, much better. Because Victoria, when you negotiate by packages, one of the things that Victoria teaches, when you negotiate by packages, it's not just discussion on pricing. You said, hey, let's negotiate pricing, but I'm going to negotiate time of response, and I'm going to go negotiate this and this and these other things. And people are willing to be able to give value to that. And that's why they're willing to pay a higher price. So when you just negotiate price, you're in a disadvantage. When you negotiate in packages with everything that it's worth, or all the other things that you could negotiate, not just money, usually you're able to get a better pricing because money is not just the only asset. So let's go to really understand negotiations and how can you use negotiations to go through inflation and be able to minimize the issues you're having today with inflation. So going back to what I was saying before, put the right topics on the table. As an example, people said, hey, it's all about price. And I was like, no, I have a client in Florida that he's a constructor of these warehouses, and the ceilings of the warehouses he buys from China. And he said, I have a warehouse that I finished constructing 4 months ago, but because of the supply chain issues, the roof hasn't arrived, and the roof is stuck somewhere, and I haven't been able to deliver the warehouse because the roof is not here. I'm willing to pay 2 times the cost of the roof, as long as I'm able to have a roof and be able to deliver the warehouse to get paid. And he's stuck. And we're looking now for a supplier of roofs in Latin America that will have less of an issue of supplier. They could get the roof faster to Miami or to Florida for him to be able to finish the warehouse and be able to give it to his client. So it's not just money. Today, we're willing to pay way more for time, convenience, producing our country. Again, as an example in food, there's a really, really big trend of eat local. So, hey, am I willing to pay more for a local farmer to have the food travel less from farm to table, and instead of having to freeze it and everything, can it come fresh to my house? Am I willing to pay more? 100%, I'm willing to pay more. So timing, as an example, freshness and all that, it's also some things that you could put on the table to negotiate the right terms or right topics. So in negotiation, instead of negotiating one by one of all the topics, put packages of topics and negotiating packages. They said, hey, here's package A, B, or C. Which one do you like? And they said, well, I like B, but I like price of C. Well, that can happen. If you want B, you have to pay price of E. But tell me, what do you like about C? And I could probably change something. Or why don't we go to C of pricing and tell me what of B you want, and I'll probably could make a concession. But once you negotiate in packages, it's very different than to negotiate one by one. Because if you negotiate one by one, you start losing little and little everything you negotiate. By the end of the negotiation, you've given the house away. When you negotiate in packages, say, hey, these are 3 options. These are all the topics of each one: time of response, quality, and all these kind of things, pricing. Then choose A, B, or C. That's it. So put the right topics on the table and have a negotiation on the right topic. Differentiate your product by telling the client the differences of your product, service, time, and everything compared to your competitor, and then price it accordingly. Understand the psychology of who are you negotiating with, buyer persona. As an example, we have a course at the Growth Institute with Adele Rivera for buyer persona, and it's super important to understand buyer persona. As an example, I have one of these digital watches that tells you like everything, right? Like my heart rate and everything, and the calories that I consume, and blah blah. And by the way, this watch is probably worth $300-400. But I see people that have a Rolex that costs them $20,000, and that Rolex just gives them the hour. Sometimes not even the calendar, the day of the month, and they're willing to pay $20,000. And this tells me everything, like tracks all my exercise and everything, and costs $400. Indeed, you could buy some of these for $100. So if someone's trying to buy a watch to get just the time, this one is way better product than that one, right? If what they're trying to buy is status or a jewel, and they want to have an excuse to have a jewel in them and in a watch, well, that's different. So if you understand the psychology of the buyer and what they're really buying, you're able to give them a better service product or a better negotiation. So what we've learned from Adele Rivera is really understanding the buyer persona and understanding their wins, their pains, and everything that they're going through to really be able to understand and deal with a negotiation based with that. As an example, there's a phrase that I've been hearing in the US for many, many years, that it was very famous on the 80s. And it was a phrase that said, no one will fire you for hiring IBM. In the 80s, there were very few technology companies that build you products or services or coding. And the risk of the project going wrong was very, very high. But if you were in charge of selecting the supplier, and if the project went wrong, most likely you're going to be fired, you went and hired IBM, because IBM supposedly was the best one at the moment. By the way, it was the most expensive by 2 or 3 times more expensive than the rest. But if the project went wrong, you said, well, you cannot fire me. I did the best decision. I hired IBM, and IBM is the best. So it was not my problem. It was IBM's problem. Same thing happens with in today's market, right? If the buyer worry or pain is that they're going to be fired if they choose the wrong supplier, then give them data and helping them with that risk. As an example, at the Growth Institute, we always give out like 30 days of money back guarantee and say, hey, come take the course, see the live sessions, see the videos, like really get into everything of the class. If you don't believe the class is going to help you and it's not going to be for you, fine, just send us an email. We'll give your money back. We'll remove 100% the risk of someone buying a class and then not using it. If after a month you haven't used it, whatever, we give your money back. It's part of the game. But we reduce the risk, and that has been a great selling point for our classes compared to other classes. So if you understand the buyer persona, their pains, their gains, like what are they looking for, what are they afraid of, you're going to be able to negotiate some terms that are going to be better for them or more important for them, and they're going to be willing to pay a higher price or move forward with you. So whenever you negotiate, you have to understand the buyer persona the most and the negotiation process and their buying process to be able to use it to your advantage. And here, let me take a quick like analogy. I love Texas Hold'em poker. I love the game. I don't play that much, but I love it. And the other day I was reading a book about Texas Hold'em. And in the introduction, they said, the good players play with their hand and maximize the value of their hand. The best players maximize the value of their competitor's hand. And I was like, but you cannot see their hand. You cannot see what cards they have. The best players know what you have. Depending on how you played, they have a pretty big guess or pretty strong guess on what they have on your cards. So they're not just playing to their strengths, they're playing to your weaknesses. And that's exactly what I learned from Victoria. Victoria has this thing called the BATNA reservation point, another way that she helps you prepare before the negotiation. By the time you sit down on the negotiation, you prepared so much, you already won. The probability of you winning is much, much higher because of all the process of negotiation. So for me, learning with Victoria has been amazing because I usually go to a negotiation and say, okay, what do you have? What do you want? And I was unprepared. Today, I never go to a negotiation without being prepared. I sit down, I spend a lot of hours internally understanding our product, the buyer persona, what they want, what they're looking for, and then we come to them. As an example, the other day we were negotiating with a thought leader a new contract, and Alex, that is my head of operations, that he's in the call here with us, we spent together probably 3 or 4 hours before we sat down negotiation, saying, hey, everything that the thought leader wanted, what they were looking for, and everything we have, and how can we be able to help them with their needs. And we made a very extensive list. We sent an email, and there was a very, very positive, fast response saying like, wow, that's amazing. You guys could help us with all of this. For us, it's perfect. And the negotiation started much, much better. So really understanding the psychology of the person you're negotiating, their user persona or their buyer persona is going to help you negotiate better. Don't close the deal at all cost. If by the time you sit down on the negotiation table, you say, I cannot lose, there's no way I could lose, then you're already lost. And there's a saying that don't commit the crime if you cannot handle the pain or whatever it's after, right? I forgot the way you guys say it in English, but don't commit the crime if you cannot do it with a punishment, right? If you just cannot go to jail for 10 years, then don't do the crime. Same thing happens in negotiation. Never, ever, ever go to a negotiation with a mindset that you could not lose. Because if you come with a mindset like, there's no way I'm going to lose, I need to get this negotiation, you're already lost. You have to sit down at the negotiation and understand you could lose, understand your reservation point, understand your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiation agreement, and be able to say, hey, by the way, Said is saying, don't do the crime if you can do the time. Thank you, Said. Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you for that. Exactly what you said. Same happens in negotiation. If whenever the time you sit down, you already said, there's no way I could lose. Like, I could not live without this. Then you're done, right? You've lost. Thank you, Said. That was exactly what I was looking for. Thank you for the phrase. So make sure when you sit down the negotiation, understand your best alternative to a negotiation agreement. Like if you don't get the agreement, what's your best alternative? And understand your reservation point. What's the lowest you're willing to negotiate before you stand up off the table? And whenever you come and say, hey, I want to negotiate, I have other options. You're my first option. You're my best option. But if we cannot get to an agreement that is good for both, I'm going to stand up. And then start negotiating. Even tell them up front. Or whenever they tell you, hey, do this, then said, you know what, if we're going to get to that, I don't do it. I like the story. I lived in Hong Kong for 2 years. My first job out of college was working in Hong Kong for the Mexican consulate. I was the financial attaché for a couple of years. And I was in charge of taking a lot of government and business delegations into the country. And after the meetings and everything, they always want to go to stores to buy things to take to their families in Mexico. So they said, hey, help me negotiate with the Chinese guys on the stores because they're tough negotiators. So I said, hey, you have to lower the price and lower the price you offer until they kick you out of the store. When they kick you out of the store, that means you go to the price. You go to their point. So they said, like, how can I negotiate until they chase me out of the store? And that's exactly why. Whenever you negotiate down, and you start like playing with the pricing, when they get mad enough and they kick you out of the store, that means that you got them a little bit below their number. So come back, just say, hey, I'm willing to go a little bit higher, and they're going to sell you the product. And they did, and they felt weird that they were going to be pushed out of a store. But I was like, that's the way you negotiate. In Hong Kong, in Kowloon, that is the tourist trap, that's the way you have to negotiate. And that was part of the game. So you have to negotiate until they kick you out for you to know you got to the right terms. So as an example, that was the way we negotiate in Kowloon, in Hong Kong. All right. Think of long-term relationships. And that's a huge one. And let me try to explain what's the difference of having a negotiation, buying a car, let's say, or a negotiation in a high-stakes negotiation, one negotiation in your office or something about your business. Whenever you're going to buy a car, the sales car agent, they know they could push how strong they want. Once you get out of the store with the car, they will never see you again. So they don't care if you don't like them. They don't care if they were tough. They don't care if they push you too much. They know they will never see you again once you sign on the car. When you're negotiating with your suppliers or your clients, it's completely different. Once they sign on the dotted line, you start the work with them. That's when the relationship starts. So if you push really, really hard, and then you agree and sign a contract, they're going to be mad with you. They will not enjoy dealing with you. So whenever you are having a negotiation, and by the way, today in inflation is going to give away in 1 or 2 or 3 years, 5 years maximum. We will come down to a more manageable inflation, right? You don't want today to be able to piss off your really important strategic relationships for them to be mad with you because you pressure too much. If they could not live without you, they will accept it, but they will not be happy with you. And whenever they can, in a year or 3 years, whatever, they're going to leave you. So it's really important that you understand which of your relationships are important and strategic, and you negotiate completely different. And you negotiate the high-stake negotiation style versus the car salesman style. If I'm going to buy a shirt or something, or Kowloon, I'm going to buy a gift for my kid in Hong Kong, I don't care if the guy didn't like me. I don't care if I pressure him too much and he pushed me out of the store. I don't care. So I'm going to pressure until he gets mad. I'm going to go higher a little bit, get the toy for my kid, and that's it. Never going to see the sales guy of the store again, right? In negotiations, in business, it's completely different. I want to have a great relationship with my suppliers. I want to have a great relationship with my clients. So my negotiation tactics have to be completely different. So understand that inflation is transitory, it's going to change, it's going to come down later. Don't be and don't be too aggressive. Do a high-stake negotiation. Negotiate by A, B, and C options. Understand there are other things important to negotiate that is not just price. Understand the psychology, the buyer persona, their gains and gains, and really negotiate a high-stake negotiation. And just the last thing, understand what is not negotiable. Because even though you're doing a high-stake negotiation, sometimes your suppliers or your clients, for you or for them, you are not important. You're not that strategic. So they're willing to give you a couple of low punches. So understand what are your non-negotiables and be able to say, you know what? This is not working for me. Above that level is just not work. I prefer not to do business with you. And you have to step aside and leave the negotiation table. This is something I really enjoyed of the book, The 4-Hour Work Week, with Tim Ferriss. I read the book 8 or 10 years ago, a long time ago. And this is one of the stories that I enjoy the most, that I use the most today. I remember that when he started his process of detoxing, he realized that 2 clients were creating the most issues for his company. And he called both clients and said, hey, you are a non grata client in my company. You always want special treatment. You always call and shout to my team, and you always want things your way and you never accept our way. And you always get mad with my team and shout to them and treat them poorly. From now on, you are prohibited to call my company and buy. If you want to buy, you have to buy by fax. If you want to complain, you have to complain by fax. I've ordered my team that if you call on the phone, they have the right to hang the phone from you. That's it. We're not going to talk to you. We'll be willing to sell to you as long as you do it through fax. And he told that on the phone to 2 or 3 clients. He said, one, I've never heard of them again. The other client, 5 years after, they were still buying by fax every week. So you have to understand that a buyer and supplier, it's a balance, right? If you're completely unbalanced, it's not worth it for you, but it's the other way around. So this buyer needed the product they were selling. They love the price, they like the brand. They were just, sorry to say the word, but kind of assholes, the way they negotiate, the way they treated their employees. And he said, I'm not willing to go there. Or you work with respect with my team, or we will not sell to you. And the only way we're going to sell to you is through fax. That's the deal. And the guy, 5 years later, he was still buying through fax. So understand, negotiables and be able to put a line and stay there. So those are the kind of things that we're doing with inflation. I'm working with a lot of clients to help them implement all of these or some of these strategies in their business. But the one thing that I'm using the most is negotiations. The one thing that is helping me today go through this inflationary stage in the world is negotiations. Everything today, you have to negotiate better, and I have to negotiate with clients on the price and the terms and everything we do with them. I also have to negotiate with my team and the suppliers of Growth Institute. And believe me, everyone has come, and suppliers and team members, everyone's like, hey, my cost is higher, I need more money. My supplier said, hey, we need to charge you more. So we're all getting into the supply. And here's the last story I want to talk and why this is so important for mid-market companies. The big corporations, the world companies, they have systems and processes on how to deal with inflation. They have systems and processes how to set pricing, systems and processes on how to raise prices. Mid-market companies, we don't. So the big companies, they reacted much faster. All the commodities reacted much faster. And we are not reacting, our prices are the same, and our margins are getting smaller. So all the mid-markets around the world, we're getting squashed with our margins because we're not responding on time. So what I ask, and why this session was important, is asking to take the time and really look at your pricing, your cost, your suppliers, your negotiation tactics. Really take the time and go through all of this that we talk, and that will significantly help you go through inflation better and be able to defend your margins. If you have a company that you're getting much less margins, it's not worth it. And in this last story that I just remember, we had a client, Wes Gardner, that went through the negotiations class with Victoria. And while he was going through the negotiations class, he realized that his biggest client, he sells $3 or $4 million to his client every year. He said, they've been asking me for all these concessions, and I've always said yes and yes and yes. And when I was going through a negotiation class, I realized that I was not making any money. Yes, I was invoicing 3 or 4 million a year, but in profit was nothing. It was not even worth it to serve the client. So I took all what I learned, and I came back to the client and called them before the class ends. Indeed, he said, by the time the class ends, I have already finished my negotiation. And he came to the company and said, hey, guys, I love to sell you. I'm very thankful that you buy from me like 3 or 4 million. It's been a great relationship for many years. So let me start by saying thank you and how grateful I am. But also have to say that you've been asking for a lot of these concessions of smaller things every time, every month, every quarter, and I've been giving you all the concessions. And now when I see the balance, the relationship with you, it's not worth it. We've got to a point that I gave you so many concessions that it's not worth it for me to sell you. So I asked that if we could come back to a negotiation table and renegotiate our contracts, understanding everything we know today and all the concessions you've asked. And we reset a negotiation terms or selling terms. If not, I'm going to have to cancel the contract and stop selling to you. And the company said, we love buying from you. We think it's a great relationship. We love the relationship with you. We love your products. We really like to work with you. We didn't knew that it was being so bad for you. So we're sorry for that. Happy to get into a negotiation table. They sat at the negotiation table, re-signed a contract for the next 3 years. And in the contract, he was able to include $1 million more of profit in 3 years. So he said, hey, with that class, even before the class ended, I got $1 million in the bottom line before even the class ended. That's the power of negotiating right. So I ask that you come and review all your expenses, your prices, your model, and use negotiation tactics to have a much better terms now that inflation is going to obligate you to renegotiate all your contracts, all your terms. All right, so that's what I want to talk. I think I went significantly over of what I was expecting, but hope you got some good nuggets, and this is going to help you go through inflation better using negotiations.